There is a scene in a Family Guy episode from 2005 where Stewie Griffin runs through a shopping mall screaming that he escaped from Kevin Spacey's basement. The joke lasts 3 seconds. The show moves on. 12 years later, Kevin Spacey's career collapsed under a wave of public accusations. That 3-second clip was suddenly everywhere. Family Guy has been canceled twice, survived 2 network wars, accidentally predicted real-world scandals, hidden a fully produced episode from American television for over 15 years, and kept going long past the point where its own creator said it should have stopped. The conventional explanation for why the show has lasted this long is that it is edgy and pushes limits. That explanation is only the surface. Today, we are going in. 10 sections, 25 years of secrets, banned episodes, near-death experiences, and the strangest creator-show relationship in the history of American animation. Welcome to Red Umbrella. Let us begin. Section 1. The Double Resurrection. How Family Guy died twice and came back from the dead. On January 31st, 1999, right after the Super Bowl ended, 22 million people sat down and watched a cartoon about a fat guy in Rhode Island fall asleep at work, collect welfare money by accident, and then fly a blimp over a football stadium to give it all back. That was the first episode of Family Guy. It was called Death Has a Shadow. 22 million people. That is not a small number. That is the kind of number that most shows never see even once in their entire run. Fox had placed the show in the best possible spot on television, the moment right after the Super Bowl ends, when the entire country is still sitting on their couch with nowhere to be. Seth McFarland had his show, he had his audience, he had his shot. Then Fox moved the show to Thursday nights. That one decision kicked off a 3-year chain of events that should have ended Family Guy permanently. Season 2 began in September 1999, in a new time slot on Thursday nights at 9 in the evening. The show sitting directly across from it on a different channel was Frasier. NBC had spent the entire decade building Thursday nights into what they called must-see TV, a lineup of shows so popular that Thursday night belonged to them the way certain streets belong to certain neighborhoods. Frasier was one of the biggest shows on television. Family Guy, a brand new cartoon that had only aired 7 episodes, was placed directly against it. The ratings collapsed. Fox pulled the show from its regular schedule and started airing episodes at random times with little warning, which made it harder for people who actually liked the show to find it. Then Fox moved Family Guy to Tuesday nights at 8:30, where it ran into Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which at that point was so popular that it was airing multiple nights a week and crushing everything near it. By the end of season 2, Family Guy had fallen from number 33 in the national ratings all the way down to number 114. From 33 to 114. That is not a show struggling. That is a show in free fall. Fox canceled it in May 2000. Then, 2 months later, Fox uncanceled it. Nobody fully understands why. The network ordered a 3rd season almost immediately after announcing the cancellation. Season 3 began airing in the fall of 2001 on Thursday nights again, this time going up against 2 of the biggest shows on television at once, Survivor and Friends. Friends was the most watched show on TV that year. Survivor had launched a reality television craze that was pulling in enormous numbers. Family Guy, running on a Thursday night against both of them, got beaten badly. Fox kept moving the time slot around, hoping something would click. Nothing did. In May 2002, the network canceled Family Guy for the 2nd time. The show had now been canceled twice in 3 years. There was an episode from season 3 that Fox had never even aired on television, an episode called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, that the network had decided was too risky to broadcast. Family Guy ended without finishing its own 3rd season on TV. That is where most stories end. The show got canceled twice. It lost to bigger shows in bad time slots, struggled to find a steady audience, and was eventually let go. What happened next is the part that does not have many comparisons in the history of American television. Cartoon Network had been watching all of this from a distance. They wanted to buy the rights to air the existing Family Guy episodes as reruns in their late-night Adult Swim block. Fox had tried to sell those rerun rights and found almost no interest from anyone. Cartoon Network eventually got them for what the president of Fox Television later described as almost nothing. The price was so low that it barely registered as a real transaction. On April 20th, 2003, Family Guy began airing reruns on Adult Swim. The 1st and 2nd season DVD sets were released that same week. What happened next surprised almost everyone involved. Adult Swim was a late-night programming block aimed at older teenagers and adults. It ran from 11 at night until 6 in the morning. It was not prime time. time. It was not a prestigious slot, but the audience that found Family Guy there treated it like they had discovered something that had been taken from them too soon. The show became the top-rated program on the entire Adult Swim block almost immediately. Viewership went up 239%. That number is not a misprint. The same show that Fox could not keep on the air at a reasonable time slot was now dominating late-night cable by a wide margin. The audience had not disappeared. They had just never been given a reliable way to find the show while it was on Fox. The DVD numbers told the same story. In the first month after the Season 1 and Season 2 sets went on sale, 400,000 copies were sold. Within the year, the combined sales reached 2.2 million copies. The Season 1 and Season 2 DVD set became the best-selling television DVD of all of 2003. The second best-selling television DVD that year, for comparison, was the first season of Chappelle's Show. Family Guy beat it. The third season DVD set sold more than 1 million copies on its own. People were buying physical discs of a show that had been canceled and removed from television because they wanted to own it badly enough to pay money to do so. That does not happen with shows that nobody cares about. Fox was paying attention. On May 20th, 2004, the network ordered 35 new episodes of Family Guy. Not a short test run, not a small order to see how it would go. 35 episodes. The announcement confirmed something that had never happened before in American television history. A show had been brought back from cancellation specifically because of DVD sales. Not because of a social media campaign, not because of a petition, not because another network wanted it, because enough people had bought enough physical discs that a major network changed its mind and reversed a decision it had made twice. The fourth season premiere, called North by North Quahog, aired on May 1st, 2005 to 11.85 million viewers. Seth McFarland, in the opening minutes of that episode, had Peter Griffin stand up and announce to his family that they had been canceled by Fox, before listing off a string of other shows the network had recently gotten rid of. Then Peter says that if all those other shows fail, Family Guy might have a shot. It was the first joke of the revival, and it was aimed directly at the network airing it. Fox let it air anyway. The show has now been on the air for over 25 years. In April 2025, Fox announced a 4-season renewal that will carry Family Guy all the way through the 2028 to 29 television season. The same show that fell to number 114 in the national ratings. The same show that a major network canceled twice in 3 years and sold the rights to for almost nothing. The same show that came back because people went out and bought DVDs of it. Family Guy is currently one of the longest-running scripted shows in American television history, sitting behind only a small handful of shows that have been on even longer. All of that comes from a 2-month period in the summer of 2000 when Fox changed its mind and gave a dead show one more season. Without that reversal, there is no third season, no Adult Swim run, no DVD sales, no comeback. The show simply ends. And everything that came after, the controversies, the banned episodes, the predictions that came true, the death and resurrection of a beloved character, none of it exists. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But here is the thing about how the show almost ended for good that most people never think about. The moment Fox first canceled Family Guy in May 2000, Seth MacFarlane was supposed to be getting on a plane, and that plane, and what happened to it, would have made the question of whether Family Guy ever came back completely irrelevant. Section 2. The Hangover That Saved Family Guy. Seth MacFarlane and American Airlines Flight 11. Seth MacFarlane grew up in Kent, Connecticut. He went to the Rhode Island School of Design, where he made short animated films in his dorm room. One of those films was called The Life of Larry, a short cartoon about a middle-aged man and his dog. A Fox executive saw it, liked it, and asked MacFarlane to develop it into something bigger. MacFarlane took Larry, redesigned him, renamed him Peter Griffin, renamed the dog Brian, moved them to a fictional city in Rhode Island called Quahog, added a family around them, and pitched the whole thing to Fox in May 1998. Fox said yes. Family Guy went into production. MacFarlane was 24 years old when the show got picked up. He was 25 when it first aired after the Super Bowl. By the fall of 2001, the show had already been canceled once, brought back, and was struggling through its third season against Friends and Survivor on Thursday nights. MacFarlane was still the face and the voice of the show. He voiced Peter, Stewie, Brian, and Quagmire all by himself, 4 of the main characters, in the same recording sessions. The show was in trouble. The ratings were bad. The future was uncertain. uncertain. But it was still going, still producing episodes, still alive in whatever limited way a show running on borrowed time can be called alive. On the evening of September 10th, 2001, McFarland was in Rhode Island. He had been invited back to his old school to give a talk to students. After the talk ended, he went out with some of the faculty and had drinks. By his own account, he had more than a few. He stayed out later than he should have. He had a flight the next morning, American Airlines Flight 11, departing from Boston Logan International Airport, heading to Los Angeles. His travel agent had written the departure time on his travel sheet as 8:15 in the morning. The actual departure time was 7:45. McFarland woke up the next morning hungover and already running behind. He made it to the airport, walked up to the check-in counter, gave his name, and told the woman behind the counter he was booked on Flight 11. She looked at her screen and told him he was too late. The gate had already closed. He had missed the flight by roughly 10 minutes. He walked away from the counter, found a spot in the airport lounge, and fell asleep. About 45 minutes later, he woke up to a commotion around him. People were standing still, staring at television screens mounted on the walls. McFarland looked up at the screens. The first plane had already hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. He sat there and watched the second plane hit. Then the news reported which flight had struck first. It was American Airlines Flight 11, the flight he had just missed, the flight he would have been sitting on. McFarland later described the moment in an interview. He said he turned to the man sitting next to him and told him that was the flight he was supposed to be on, that he had been late and missed it. He said the first few weeks after that were rattling. That is the word he used, rattling. But he also said, with a directness that surprised some people when they heard it, that he did not walk away from that day feeling like fate had saved him, or that he was meant to be alive for a reason. He said he had missed other flights before for the same kinds of reasons. He said coincidences happen. He described himself as not being a fatalist, meaning he does not believe things happen for a reason, or that the universe arranged for him to be late that morning. The facts of what happened to Flight 11 are documented. The plane was hijacked after takeoff. At 8:46 in the morning, it was flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Everyone on board was killed. The flight had 81 passengers and 11 crew members. Among the people on that flight was a television producer named David Angel, who had created the show Frasier, the same show that had been placed against Family Guy on Thursday nights and had helped cause the ratings collapse that led to the first cancellation. Angel and his wife Lynn were both killed. McFarland was the only reason he missed that plane. There were two separate things working against him that morning. First, his travel agent had given him the wrong time. The itinerary said the flight left 10 minutes later than it actually did. Second, he had been out drinking the night before and woke up slow. Either one of those things alone might not have been enough. Both of them together meant he arrived at the counter just after the gate had closed. 10 minutes. He was specific about that number in multiple interviews. 10 minutes was the difference. The question of what happens to Family Guy if McFarland boards that flight is not a small one. He was not just the creator of the show. He was the voice of 4 main characters. He was the person Fox had a contract with. The show was already in a fragile state. In its 3rd season, losing in the ratings, heading toward what would become its 2nd cancellation the following year. Without McFarland, the show almost certainly does not survive even that much. It does not get the Adult Swim run. The DVDs do not sell the same way without his name attached. Fox does not order 35 new episodes in 2004 because there is no McFarland to make them with. There is no season 4. There is no revival. And the effects go further than just Family Guy. McFarland went on to create American Dad, which premiered in 2005 right after the Super Bowl. Fox used the same post-Super Bowl strategy twice, both times with McFarland shows. He created The Cleveland Show. He wrote and directed the Ted films, which together made over $1 billion at the box office. He created and starred in The Orville, a science fiction show that ran for 3 seasons. He became one of the most financially successful people in American animation. None of that exists if he gets on the plane. There is a version of this story where people point to the hangover and the travel agent mistake as some kind of message about something larger. McFarland himself has consistently pushed back against that reading. He has said in multiple interviews that he does not believe he was supposed to survive, or that there was any larger meaning in what happened. He has been clear that he finds the idea uncomfortable rather than comforting. What he has also said is that the experience did not fundamentally change how he lived or how he thought about things. He went back to work. The show kept going. He kept making it. There is one specific detail in this story that tends to get left out when people talk about it. McFarland did not find out what flight it was from the news. He found out from the man sitting next to him in the airport lounge. He was already in the building when everything happened. He watched both planes hit from from inside the same airport the first plane had departed from. He was at Logan International, and so was Flight 11. And the gap between where he was sitting and where that plane went was 45 minutes of sleep in an airport chair. Family Guy itself has never directly addressed the fact that its creator survived September 11th. McFarland has said he would not reference his own survival in the show, and the show has honored that. There are jokes in various episodes that take aim at the political response to September 11th, and at the Bush administration's handling of the aftermath, but nothing that touches the personal experience McFarland had that morning. That line has held across more than 25 seasons. What the show did do, in the season 4 premiere in 2005, was have Peter Griffin announce to his family that they had all been canceled. That was the first joke of the comeback season. A show that had been canceled twice, whose creator had missed a plane by 10 minutes, whose entire existence had been one close call after another, came back and opened with a joke about being canceled. That is either the most confident thing a television show has ever done, or it is what happens when the person running the show has already survived something that makes a bad rating seem small. McFarland stopped writing for the show entirely in 2010. He has said publicly that he thinks 7 seasons is the right lifespan for any TV show, and that Family Guy had gone past that point. He shifted to producing and voice acting, and started working on the film projects and other shows that would define the next chapter of his career. The show kept going without him writing for it. It is still going. He is still voicing Peter, Stewie, Brian, and Quagmire in a show he has said he wishes had ended years ago, on a network that canceled it twice, built on a foundation that includes a 10-minute gap at an airport gate on the morning of September 11th, 2001. The story of how Family Guy survived is a story about DVD sales and Adult Swim ratings and a network changing its mind. But underneath all of that, it is also a story about a hangover and a travel agent who wrote down the wrong time. Take either one of those away and the show is gone. The DVDs never happen. The comeback never happens. The 400 plus episodes that came after never happen. There is something almost strange about the fact that the show most famous for not taking anything seriously owes its entire existence to one of the most serious mornings in American history. McFarland has never made peace with calling it fate, but the math is simple enough. He missed the plane, the show survived. Everything else followed from that. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now, the survival of Family Guy after 2 cancellations and a near miss at an airport meant the show was still around to do something Fox had never really expected: make episodes so controversial that the network refused to air them at all. And of all the episodes that ever got flagged, cut, or quietly buried, there is exactly one that has never been seen on American television from the day it was made to this day. Section 3, the episode America Was Never Allowed to See, Partial Terms of Endearment. Family Guy had been pushing at the edges of what television would allow since the very first episode. The show made jokes about welfare fraud, alcoholism, child neglect, and physical violence in its pilot. It had done episodes about suicide, drug addiction, racism, and religion. It had mocked the Catholic Church, made fun of people with disabilities, and run cutaway gags that most other shows would never have tried to get past a network in the first place. Fox had let almost all of it air. The show's reputation was built on the idea that it would go places other shows would not, and for the most part, Fox backed that up. But there were 2 moments across the entire history of the show when Fox drew a line and said no. The first was a season 3 episode called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, which Fox held back in 2000 out of fear that it would be seen as making fun of Jewish people. That episode eventually aired on Adult Swim in 2003, and then on Fox itself in 2004. The wait was long, but the episode did make it to television in the end. The second time Fox said no, the episode never made it to American television at all. Not then, not years later, not ever. The episode was called Partial Terms of Endearment. It was the 21st and final episode of season 8. It was written by a writer named Danny Smith, directed by Joseph Lee, and the original idea for it came from another writer on the show named Tom Devaney. The subject was abortion. The idea came up in the writer's room, and, according to McFarland, caught fire immediately. People felt it was the kind of topic the show had been built to handle, something that every other major television show was too nervous to touch directly. Before Danny Smith started writing the script, McFarland asked him to read a specific essay. The essay was written by the scientist Carl Sagan and appeared in his 1997 book called Billions and Billions. The essay was titled Abortion: Is It Possible to Be Both Pro-Life and Pro-Choice? Sagan's essay was known for taking an unusually careful look at both sides of the argument, going through the science and the philosophy without simply picking one one team and staying there. McFarland wanted that spirit to be present in the episode. He wanted the show to actually engage with the question, rather than just make fun of one side while the other side cheered. The story that Smith wrote goes like this. Lois runs into an old friend from college named Naomi at her 20-year reunion at Salve Regina University. Naomi tells Lois that she and her husband Dale cannot have children on their own and asks Lois to carry a baby for them. After some arguing with Peter, who is very much against the idea, Lois agrees. She goes through the procedure and becomes pregnant. Then, while she is carrying the baby, Naomi and Dale are killed in a car accident. Lois is now left pregnant with a baby whose biological parents are dead, carrying a child that is not hers and that nobody is waiting to raise. She and Peter have to decide what to do. Peter, after running into a group of people protesting outside a clinic, becomes convinced that abortion is wrong and refuses to consider it. The episode shows him being influenced by an over-the-top anti-abortion video and becoming more and more worked up, while Lois is left trying to think through the actual situation in front of her. The episode plays both sides. It does not simply make the pro-life position look stupid or the pro-choice position look obviously correct. It follows the mess of the real situation. Lois genuinely struggles. Peter is wrong in the way Peter is always wrong, through ignorance and stubbornness rather than evil, but the show does not let the other side off entirely either. McFarland made one significant decision that shaped the whole episode. He decided that Lois had to actually make a choice. The script had originally been written to end without showing what Lois decided. The audience would be left not knowing. McFarland said he hated that kind of ending, the kind where a big question gets raised, and then the show steps back and refuses to answer it. He found that cowardly. So he added a short moment at the very end where Peter pops into the frame and tells the audience directly that she had the abortion. The episode picks a side. It just waits until the last possible second to do it. Fox knew the episode was being made. McFarland had presented the idea to the network, and the network had told him there was a risk they might not air it, but allowed production to go ahead anyway. That arrangement, you can make it, but we might not air it, was the same deal Fox had given with When You Wish Upon a Weinstein years earlier, and that episode had eventually aired. McFarland assumed the same thing would probably happen this time. He said publicly that he expected Fox to come around eventually, that these situations usually settled down. They did not settle down. Fox president Kevin Riley announced that the network would not be airing the episode. When he explained the decision to the New York Times, he did not frame it as a moral choice. He framed it as a money choice. He said it was an extremely fragile subject at an extremely fragile economic time. He said of all the issues a show could tackle, abortion was the one that seemed most likely to cause advertisers to pull their money. He specifically said the episode felt like it could cause trouble, and it was just not worth it. He also acknowledged, in that same conversation, that the episode had been handled well. He was not saying the show had done something wrong. He was saying that even a well-handled episode about this particular topic was too risky for the advertisers who paid for the show to run. Riley also made a point of saying that Fox did not censor McFarland. He said the network supported the producer's right to make the episode and release it however they wanted. They just would not be the ones putting it on television in America. Fox then went to Adult Swim and asked them, as a favor, not to air it either. Adult Swim agreed. A spokesperson for Adult Swim confirmed publicly that there were no plans to air the episode on their network. The episode aired on BBC Three in the United Kingdom on June 20th, 2010, as part of the show's regular Sunday night slot on that channel. It was watched in just under 1 million homes in the UK during that broadcast. Critics who reviewed it were largely positive. A reviewer for IGN gave it a 7 out of 10 and noted that the writers had not taken the easy way out, that the episode had actually picked a side rather than leaving things vague. A writer for Salon pointed out how strange it was that Family Guy, a show not known for serious treatment of anything, had been one of the only programs on television brave enough to address the topic at all, and that Fox refusing to air it showed how far American television still had to go. McFarland told the New York Times that he believed if the same story had been told on a drama, he named the show House as an example, it probably would have aired without any trouble. The fact that it was a cartoon comedy is what made it feel more dangerous to the network, even though the episode itself was no more extreme than what Family Guy aired every single week. That gap, a serious drama can touch the topic, but a comedy cannot, is something McFarland clearly found frustrating. The episode was released on DVD in the United States on September 28th, 2010. It has never aired on Fox. It has never aired on Adult Swim. It is not available on Hulu, which is where Family Guy streams in America. It is not on Disney Plus, which owns the show. It aired in Australia in April 2011 on a channel called 7 Mate. It aired in the Netherlands later that year on Comedy Central, everywhere except the country that made it. What makes this remarkable is not that Fox refused to air one episode. What makes it remarkable is which episode they refused. Family Guy had aired jokes about the Holocaust. It had aired jokes about child abuse, rape, and death in ways that regularly drew complaints from viewers and watchdog groups. It had shown graphic cartoon violence, made fun of dying celebrities, and run cutaway gags that depicted things far darker than a woman making a difficult decision about a pregnancy. Almost all of that aired without the network pulling the episode. The one thing that crossed the line was not cruelty or darkness or vulgarity. It was a story that took a clear position on the most politically charged topic in American life. That was what Fox would not put on television. McFarland has said he thinks the episode would have aired without any issue if it had been a drama. Fox has never reversed its decision. The episode remains the only piece of Family Guy that was fully produced, fully finished, and then simply kept off American television entirely. Not because the show went too far in the ways it usually goes too far, but because it went somewhere more careful and more honest than it usually does. And that turned out to be the thing nobody was willing to broadcast. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now, the band episode is as far down the iceberg as most people ever go when they think about Family Guy's relationship with what it can and cannot say. But there is an entirely different layer underneath all of it. Not what the show wasn't allowed to do, but what the show seemed to know before anyone else did. Because scattered across more than 2 decades of cutaway gags and throwaway jokes, Family Guy kept landing on things that hadn't happened yet. Section 4. The show that kept accidentally predicting the future. There is a scene in a Family Guy episode from 2005 where baby Stewie Griffin runs naked through a shopping mall, screaming that he has escaped from Kevin Spacey's basement. The joke lasts about 3 seconds. Stewie gets $1 from Brian for doing it, and the show moves on. Nobody thought much about it at the time. It was a throwaway gag, the kind the show produces dozens of every season, aimed at a celebrity and forgotten almost immediately. 12 years later, in October 2017, multiple people came forward publicly with accusations against actor Kevin Spacey involving serious misconduct. The accusations describe behavior going back decades. Actor Anthony Rapp said Spacey had made unwanted advances toward him in 1986 when Rapp was 14 years old. After Rapp came forward, more people followed. 15 people in total made accusations against Spacey. His career collapsed almost overnight. And somewhere in an archive, a 3-second clip of a cartoon baby screaming about escaping from Kevin Spacey's basement was suddenly everywhere on the internet. This is the phenomenon that has followed Family Guy for years. The show makes a throwaway joke. Time passes. Something happens in the real world that the joke seems to have predicted. People share the clip. Articles get written. The word psychic comes up. The writers get asked in interviews if they knew something the rest of the world did not. The honest answer, which McFarland has given on multiple occasions, is that the show did not know anything. The Kevin Spacey joke was written because rumors about Spacey had floated around certain parts of Hollywood for a long time before anything became public. McFarland has acknowledged that the entertainment industry had whispers about certain people that never made it into the press. Writing a joke about someone like that was not a prediction. It was a joke aimed at a rumor that turned out to be true. The difference matters. But the gap between writing a joke based on a rumor in 2005 and that rumor being confirmed publicly in 2017 is 12 years. 12 years of that clip sitting in an episode, waiting. The Bruce Jenner situation worked differently, and the timeline on it is very specific. In a 2009 episode called We Love You, Conrad, Stewie and Brian are at a red carpet event and spot Brody Jenner, who is the son of Olympic gold medalist Bruce Jenner. Stewie says he cannot believe Brody came out of Bruce Jenner's body. Brian corrects him, saying Bruce Jenner is a man. Stewie disagrees. He says, "No, Brian, that is what the press would have you believe. But Bruce Jenner is a woman, an elegant, beautiful Dutch woman." The scene gets a laugh, and the show continues. In 2015, 6 years after that episode aired, Bruce Jenner publicly came out as a woman and began living as Caitlyn Jenner. The clip from 2009 immediately started circulating online as another Family Guy prediction. What McFarland said about this one was that he was, in his own words, too savvy to comment on the issue to the media. That careful non-answer is actually more revealing than a straight explanation would have been. Multiple people who have looked closely at the timeline have pointed out that Bruce Jenner had been transitioning privately for years before the public announcement in 2015. The process had reportedly been underway since the 1980s in various forms. McFarland had met Jenner personally, as Jenner had voiced a character in a Family Guy episode that aired in November 2008. The season 7 episode was recorded sometime in 2007 or early 2008, meaning McFarland would have have spent time with Jenner during that period. The writer's room likely knew more than the general public did. The joke was not a guess. It was knowledge dressed up as a throwaway gag. The Boston Marathon situation is the one that caused the most serious real-world fallout, and it is important to understand exactly what happened because the way it is often described leaves out some of the key facts. In March 2013, Family Guy aired an episode called Turban Cowboy. In the episode, Peter befriends a Muslim man named Mahmoud and gets pulled into a terrorist plot without realizing it. That is the main story. Inside the episode, there is a completely separate cutaway gag that has nothing to do with the main plot. In the cutaway, Peter wins the Boston Marathon by driving a car through the crowd of runners, mowing people down as he goes. The joke is about Peter being lazy and cheating, not about terrorism. The marathon cutaway and the terrorism plot are separate pieces of the episode that do not connect. On April 15th, 2013, approximately 1 month after that episode aired, 2 bombs went off near the finish line of the real Boston Marathon. 3 people were killed. More than 260 people were injured. The reaction was immediate and severe. Fox pulled the episode from its streaming platforms. Adult Swim removed it from their rotation. A clip began circulating online that had been edited together to make it look like the episode predicted the bombing in a much more specific way than it actually did. The edited clip combined the marathon cutaway with the terrorism plot from the same episode, making them appear connected in a way they never were in the actual episode. McFarland and the show's team pushed back against the edited version, pointing out that it was a manipulated clip designed to make the episode look like something it was not. The actual episode, unedited, contains a car driving through a marathon crowd as a lazy joke about Peter cheating at a race. It also contains a separate plot about a terrorist. Those 2 things happen in the same episode, but they are not related to each other inside the story. The edited version that spread online removed that context and made the 2 things look like one connected scene. The episode stayed off American streaming platforms for years. It did not return to Hulu until September 2022, nearly a decade after it was pulled. It was released on DVD during that period. The episode itself was not banned the way Partial Terms of Endearment was banned. It was more like a quiet removal that lasted an extremely long time. The Robin Williams parallel is smaller and more clearly coincidental than the others, but it gets brought up often enough to mention. In May 2012, Family Guy aired an episode in which Peter wishes that everyone around him looked like Robin Williams. The episode involved a storyline that touched on suicide. On August 11th, 2014, Robin Williams died by suicide. On that same night, BBC 3 in the United Kingdom happened to be airing that particular Family Guy episode, as it was killed by the breaking news. People watching the channel saw the episode end and immediately saw the news reports about Williams begin. The timing was not a prediction of anything. It was a coincidence involving a rerun schedule and the worst possible news breaking at the worst possible moment. But the overlap was disturbing enough that it spread widely online. The anti-vaccination episode aired in 2018. In it, Peter and Lois start an anti-vaccination movement in Quahog after Stewie gets hurt trying to stop a bat from getting into the house. Parents across the town stop vaccinating their children. A measles outbreak starts at Stewie's daycare. The town goes into a kind of quarantine. Brian is the only one worried about the real consequences, while everyone else argues about their rights and their freedom to make their own choices. In 2020, COVID-19 arrived, and the arguments happening in the real world about vaccines, personal freedom, and who had the right to tell people what to do with their bodies mirrored the episode closely enough that clips from it started circulating again. The episode had not predicted a specific virus. It had predicted, fairly accurately, how a significant portion of the population would behave during one. Seth McFarland addressed the general pattern of these apparent predictions in several interviews over the years. His consistent position has been that the show is not predicting anything. What the show is doing, he has said, is paying close attention to patterns that already exist. Family Guy writes hundreds of jokes every season about celebrities, politicians, cultural trends, and current events. The show has been doing this for over 25 years. When you produce that volume of material aimed at real people and real situations, some of it is going to land near something that eventually happens. The Kevin Spacey situation was based on existing rumors. The Caitlyn Jenner situation was based on knowledge the writers had access to. The Boston Marathon situation was a coincidence combined with a deceptively edited clip that made it look more specific than it was. But the pattern holds regardless of the explanation. The show keeps landing close to things before they happen publicly. McFarland has been clear that he does not think the writers have any special ability to see the future. What they have, he has suggested, is a writer's room full of people who pay close attention to the world and are willing to make jokes about things that other shows leave alone because those things feel too uncomfortable or too risky. The Kevin Spacey joke got made because someone in that room was willing to name someone who most of Hollywood was quietly talking about. The Caitlyn Jenner joke got made because someone with personal knowledge of the situation was willing to put it in an animated comedy years before it was public information. The willingness to go to uncomfortable places that other shows avoid is the same trait that got partial terms of endearment banned. It is also what produces these moments that look, years later, like the show knew something. The difference between Family Guy and other shows that have had similar apparent predictions, The Simpsons being the most famous example, is that Family Guy's predictions tend to cluster around people's private behavior and personal secrets rather than large-scale political events.
The Simpsons predicted Donald Trump becoming president in a 2000 episode. That was a broader cultural observation about celebrity and politics. Family Guy's apparent predictions tend to be more personal. Kevin Spacey's behavior, Bruce Jenner's gender. These are things about specific individuals that were known to certain people and not to the general public. The gap between when Family Guy wrote the joke and when the rest of the world found out is the gap between what Hollywood knew and what got reported. None of this makes the show psychic. It makes the show well connected to a specific world, writing jokes for an audience that would not find out until later what the writer's room already knew or strongly suspected. The jokes are the visible part. The knowledge underneath them is the part that nobody talks about. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What the Kevin Spacey clip and the Caitlyn Jenner clip and the Boston Marathon episode have in common is that they all spread because they gave people the feeling that someone, somewhere, had known. That feeling is powerful. It makes people look at a cartoon differently. It makes throwaway gags feel like they were always pointing at something. And once you start looking for that pattern in Family Guy, you start to find it in places where the show is doing something much more deliberate. Places where it is not accidentally landing near the truth, but is specifically and carefully constructing a character designed to represent something real about the world. Which is what makes the treatment of one specific character across all 25 seasons of this show one of the most revealing things about what Family Guy actually thinks of the people watching it. Section 5. The Meg Griffin Problem. Why the writers deliberately broke their own character. In the very first season of Family Guy, Meg Griffin is a 15-year-old girl trying to fit in at school. She wants to be popular. She gets embarrassed by her father in public. She has a crush on a boy and cannot figure out how to talk to him. She is awkward and a little desperate for attention, but she is recognizable. She feels like a real teenager. The jokes about her in season 1 are mostly about how ordinary she is compared to the chaos around her. Her dad is getting fired for welfare fraud. Her baby brother is building weapons in the garage. Her dog is writing a novel. And Meg is just trying to get through high school. She is the most normal person in the house, and the show treats that as slightly funny in a gentle way. That version of Meg Griffin does not exist anymore. Somewhere between season 1 and the later years of the show, she was transformed into something else entirely. A target. Not a character who gets unlucky sometimes, or a character who the show occasionally puts through something rough, but a designated victim whose entire purpose on the show became absorbing abuse from everyone around her. Her own father tells her to shut up so often that "Shut Up, Meg" became one of the most recognized lines the show ever produced. Her family tries to give her away to criminals. Her parents openly wish she had never been born. Peter has a recurring gag where he traps her face near him and then farts on her. The school makes fun of her. Strangers make fun of her. Characters who have never met her make fun of her on sight. The question of how this happened is not a mystery. The people who made the show have explained it directly. In season 1, Meg was voiced by an actress named Lacey Chabert. Chabert was busy with her work on the TV show Party of Five and with school, and after the first season, she was replaced by Mila Kunis, who has voiced Meg from season 2 onward through the entire run of the show. The character change did not happen because of the voice change. Kunis stepped in and continued playing the same character that Chabert had established. The change happened later, and it came from inside the writer's room. The writer's room at Family Guy was, for most of the show's run, made up primarily of men. Seth McFarland has acknowledged this. Various writers and producers connected to the show have acknowledged it over the years. The specific issue that came up repeatedly was that the writing staff had difficulty writing for a teenage girl. They could write Peter being foolish, they could write Stewie being sinister, they could write Brian being pretentious. Those characters fit comfortable comedic shapes that the writers understood from the inside. Meg, a self-conscious, socially anxious teenage girl trying to navigate high school, did not fit any shape the room knew how to work with comfortably. The stories they wrote for her kept falling flat. The jokes did not land. Rather than solving that problem by hiring writers who could relate to Meg's experience, or by spending more time developing the character into something that worked, the room found a different solution. They made Meg the butt of the joke instead of the subject of it. Instead of writing writing stories where Meg was the main character and the comedy came from her situation, they started using her as the thing other characters reacted to. Peter's cruelty toward Meg became a running joke. The family's indifference to her became a running joke. Her desperation for affection became a running joke. Each of those things is easier to write than a real Meg story, because none of them require the writers to actually understand her. They just require someone to be mean to her and someone else to laugh at it. McFarland himself addressed the mechanics of this in interviews. He said that the more you kick somebody, the funnier it gets. That is not a theory about Meg specifically.
It is a general principle of comedy. Escalation tends to be funny when applied to the same target over and over. The problem with applying that principle to a character for 15 years is that the escalation has to keep going somewhere new to stay funny, and the only direction available once you have made a character into a punching bag is to hit harder and harder. By the middle seasons of the show, Peter was not just embarrassing Meg. The family was wishing her dead. They were forgetting she existed entirely. They were using her as a literal object. The escalation the writers found funny had long since passed anything that could be called a joke about a specific human situation, and had become something closer to a contest over how far they could push it. The show's own in-universe explanation for why this happens came in Season 10, Episode 2, called Seahorse Seashell Party. In the episode, Meg reaches a breaking point and confronts her family. She calls out Chris for being a bad brother. She tells Lois and Peter directly what kind of parents they are. The family starts turning on each other. Then, Meg comes to a conclusion on her own and apologizes. She tells her family that she thinks she is the lightning rod. She is the one who absorbs all of the family's dysfunction, who takes all the damage, and by doing that, she keeps everyone else from having to deal with it. Without her as the target, they would destroy each other. She accepts this role. The status quo returns to normal. The show hits the reset button, and the next episode begins as though nothing happened. That episode is one of the more honest things Family Guy ever did about itself. The writers were putting the actual explanation for how Meg functions into the show's own mouth. She is not a character in the traditional sense by this point. She is a structural device. She exists to absorb damage so the rest of the show can keep running. The episode acknowledges this, has Meg accept it, and then continues doing exactly what it was doing before. Critics noticed. A reviewer for the AV Club wrote at the time that the show spent years going down the path of least resistance and simply joined the fan chorus of hatred toward Meg, rather than making any real effort to develop her into something useful. The abuse ran in distinct phases. In the early seasons, before the revival, the jokes about Meg were mild. She was boring, she was uncool, she could not get a date. Those jokes were gentle compared to what came later. After the show came back in season 4, the treatment escalated steadily. By seasons 8 through 14, which many viewers and critics identify as the peak of the abuse, the show had pushed into territory that was darker than anything in the early years. Peter openly said Meg's name was what he called his mistake. Episodes suggested her parents had tried to abandon her as a baby at a fire station. The family read her diary out loud for entertainment. There were suggestions in multiple episodes that Peter might not even be her biological father, with a character named Stan Thompson referenced as a possible real parent, though this was never confirmed as canon. The actual name thing is a real detail from the show. In the season 11 episode, A Fistful of Meg, it is revealed that Peter altered Meg's birth certificate so that her full legal name is Megatron Griffin. Lois had originally chosen the name Megan. Peter changed it without telling anyone. This is presented as a joke, and it lands that way, but the detail also fits the pattern of the show treating Meg as someone whose identity is not her own to control, not even her name. Mila Kunis, who has voiced Meg through nearly the entire run of the show, has spoken in interviews about what it is like to play the character. She has said that Meg gets picked on a lot. She has pointed to the fact that Meg is the voice of reason in many episodes, the character who looks at whatever Peter or Brian or Stewie is doing and correctly identifies that it is stupid or wrong. The joke in those moments is that nobody listens to her even when she is right, but Kunis has not expressed anger about the character's treatment. She has framed it more as an understanding of the role Meg plays in the show's structure. The abuse began fading after season 14 for reasons the show itself provided. In season 15, an episode called Peter's Sister introduced Peter's sister Karen, a professional wrestler who treats Peter exactly the way Peter treats Meg. Peter and Meg bond over this shared experience. They work together to embarrass Karen in public. The episode showed Meg and Peter genuinely connecting over something real. After that episode, the show stopped using Meg abuse as a frequent go-to gag. The later seasons, from season 20 onward, largely dropped it. By the most recent seasons, Meg is treated relatively normally by the family. The decade-long joke had run its course. What the whole arc of Meg's character reveals about Family Guy is something the show would
would probably never frame this way itself. The series built its identity on the idea that it was willing to go further than other shows, that it would say things that made people uncomfortable, that it had no sacred cows. But the treatment of Meg was never actually brave in that sense. It was the opposite. It was the writers taking the easiest option available to them when faced with a character they did not know how to write. Making Meg a victim required no understanding of her. It required no empathy. It required no craft beyond deciding who would be cruel to her this week and how. The show that prided itself on going to hard places took the simplest possible exit when one of its main characters became difficult to write.
The generation that grew up with Family Guy absorbed the Meg dynamic without necessarily analyzing it. Shut up, Meg became a phrase people used in real life. It spread to social media, got applied to situations completely outside the show, became a way of dismissing someone by using her name as the dismissal itself. That spread suggests the joke landed hard enough that it became part of how the audience thought about people who complain, people who are awkward, people who want things the world has decided not to give them. Whether the show intended to teach that lesson is impossible to know, but the lesson traveled. The show eventually course-corrected. Meg exists in the later seasons in a more recognizable human shape than she did in season 10, but the reset button the show hit at the end of Seahorse Seashell Party hit so many times across so many seasons that the correction, when it came, felt less like a choice and more like the writers simply getting tired of the bit. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And Meg's story is really about what happened to the whole show after the revival. How characters who started as recognizable people got pushed further and further into single shapes that were easier to write and funnier in the short term and hollower over time. That process did not just affect Meg. It affected the character who started the show as a full-on supervillain, intent on killing his own mother, and who the writers slowly, season by season, turned into something they found more useful, and in doing so, created one of the strangest character transformations in the history of American animation. Section 6. Stewie Griffin's Abandoned Identity, from supervillain to something stranger. The first time you see Stewie Griffin in the pilot episode of Family Guy, he is sitting in his high chair at the breakfast table. His mother Lois puts a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. Stewie looks at the eggs, looks at his mother, and tells her in a calm British accent that he has no intention of eating them and that she cannot make him. Lois smiles and tells him to eat his eggs. Stewie looks directly into the camera and tells the audience that this is not over. That exchange sets up exactly what the show intends Stewie to be, a baby who is secretly running a war with his mother, who speaks in a voice that sounds like a British actor from an old film, and who takes every minor domestic conflict as a battle in a much larger campaign. By the end of that same pilot episode, Stewie has used a mind control device to manipulate a judge into ruling in Peter's favor during a welfare fraud case. He has also, in a separate moment, fired what the show presents as a functional weapon. He is 1 year old. He cannot walk without wobbling, but he can build technology that should not exist. He wants to dominate the world, and he wants to kill his mother, and the show presents both of these desires as simple facts about who he is, offered without explanation or justification. He is just like this. That original Stewie is a very specific kind of joke. The comedy comes entirely from the gap between what he is, a baby, and what he does, plan murders and build weapons. The British accent adds a layer of formality that makes the violence funnier. When Stewie pulls out a weapon in season 1, the laugh is not about what the weapon does. The laugh is about the fact that a 1-year-old is holding it and speaking about it in complete sentences with a sophisticated vocabulary. The character works because the gap is so wide. Nothing about Stewie should make sense, and none of it does, and that is the entire point. What happened to that character over the following seasons is one of the most documented and discussed changes in the show's history. And it happened gradually enough that most viewers absorbed it without quite noticing when the shift occurred. Season 1 Stewie is actively trying to kill Lois. This is not a vague threat or a running joke that the show waves at and moves on from. The plots of several season 1 episodes center on Stewie's actual attempts to end his mother's life. He builds elaborate traps. He devises plans. He talks through his schemes in detail and then executes them. The show treats his murderous intent as genuine within its own cartoon logic, and the comedy comes from the fact that he keeps failing, not because the plans are bad, but because the universe conspires against him in the way cartoon universes do. By season 2, something had already started shifting. The episode Road to Rhode Island, which is the 13th episode of season 2, sends Brian and Stewie on a road trip together. During that trip, they have an actual conversation. Not a conversation where Stewie threatens Brian or tries to manipulate him. A conversation where Stewie talks about something real, something personal, something that suggests
suggests he has feelings beneath the supervillain's surface. Brian responds to him like a person, rather than like a prop. By the end of the episode, their friendship has been established in a way it never was in Season 1. That friendship became the most important relationship in the show for the next 20 seasons. The writers have been direct about why the original evil Stewie was abandoned. The specific reason Seth McFarland and the team have given is that the evil genius premise had limited range. A character whose entire purpose is to try to kill his mother and take over the world can only do so many things. Every episode with Stewie had to involve a plan that failed, and plans failing get repetitive quickly. The writers found they could not keep generating new reasons for the plan to fail that were different enough from the previous ones to be funny.
The character was painted into a corner by his own premise. What they discovered instead was that Stewie worked better as a character who could react to the world around him rather than constantly acting against it. A Stewie who could be surprised, who could be hurt, who could care about something, was more flexible than a Stewie who only cared about domination and murder. The friendship with Brian opened up an enormous amount of creative space. The Brian and Stewie episodes became the most praised episodes in the show's later seasons precisely because that relationship had real texture. There was genuine affection there, and also genuine friction. And the combination of those two things produced comedy that the original evil Stewie template never could have. The clearest marker of the transition came in Season 6, in a two-part episode called Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie. These two episodes were designed to be the final payoff on the original premise. After 6 seasons of Stewie plotting to kill his mother, the show actually lets him do it. In Stewie Kills Lois, Stewie shoots Lois and she disappears into the ocean. In Lois Kills Stewie, Lois comes back, having survived, and the two of them engage in a direct confrontation that ends with Stewie being shot and apparently killed. At the very end of the second episode, it is revealed that the entire two-parter was a simulation Stewie ran on his computer to see what would happen. The real Stewie is sitting at his desk, watching the simulation play out. He realizes, having seen the simulation through to its conclusion, that he is not actually ready to kill Lois. That ending is doing something very specific. The show is using the simulation reveal to close a door. By having Stewie decide inside the simulation that he does not want this after all, the writers were telling the audience that the Kill Lois plot had run its course. The original premise was being formally retired. After those 2 episodes, Stewie's attempts on Lois's life essentially disappeared from the show. The murderous baby who opened the pilot had made his final, real attempt. What replaced that premise was something the writers found more interesting and more flexible. Stewie's identity, his sense of who he is, his relationship with Brian, his ambiguous feelings about almost everything, became the new engine for his stories. The show began hinting at Stewie's sexuality in a way it never directly confirmed. He was shown having romantic feelings in various directions without the show ever pinning down exactly what those feelings meant. He developed a complex attachment to his teddy bear Rupert that the show played sometimes as comedy and sometimes as something more emotionally honest. He could be vulnerable with Brian in ways he was never vulnerable with anyone in Season 1. The Season 16 episode, Send in Stewie Please, is one of the most direct examinations the show ever did of who this version of Stewie actually is. In the episode, Stewie is sent to see a child psychiatrist, voiced by Ian McKellen, after getting into a fight at his preschool. The episode is unusual for Family Guy in that it is almost entirely a 2-person conversation. Very few cutaway gags, very little of the usual surrounding noise of the show. Just Stewie in a room with a doctor being asked questions. During the episode, Stewie opens up in ways the character rarely does. He admits things about himself. He starts to show the doctor who he actually is underneath the persona he performs for everyone around him. Then the doctor has a heart attack. He asks Stewie to hand him his heart medicine. Stewie refuses. He lets the doctor die rather than allow someone who has seen his real self to stay alive and potentially tell other people what he learned. The episode ends with Stewie having killed his therapist, not out of villainy or world domination plotting, but out of fear of being known. That is a completely different motivation from anything Season 1 Stewie ever had. It is darker in some ways than the cartoonish evil of the original character, because it is rooted in something recognizable. The fear of being seen clearly by another person is not a supervillain emotion. It is a human one. Fans have had mixed reactions to the transformation across the show's run. On one side are the viewers who loved the original evil Stewie and feel the show gave something up when it abandoned that premise. Reddit threads on the subject consistently include people who describe Season 1 Stewie as funnier, sharper, more interesting than what came after. Their argument is that the evil genius character
had a specific energy that the softer, more emotionally available Stewie lacks. On the other side are viewers who find the evolved Stewie genuinely more interesting than the original, who argue that a character capable of real feeling is more useful to a long-running show than one locked into a single joke. Both positions are present in the fan community in roughly equal measure. What neither side disputes is that the change happened and that it was deliberate. McFarland and the writers made a conscious decision to move Stewie away from what he was at the start. The evil baby was funny for a few seasons. The character who replaced him has been running for 20-plus seasons, which by itself suggests the writers made the right call in practical terms, even if the creative argument about which version is better remains unresolved. There is one detail about Stewie that does not fit neatly into either the old version or the new one, and it is a detail the show has never fully resolved. Stewie knows things he should not know. He has access to technology that does not exist. He can travel through time. He can visit alternate universes, and he apparently understands physics at a level no human being currently does.
The show occasionally gestures at the idea that no one around him can hear what he is saying, that his sophisticated speech is somehow invisible to adults, but this is applied inconsistently. Sometimes adults hear him clearly, sometimes they do not. The show has never committed to a single explanation for what Stewie actually is and how his world works, and after 25 seasons, it seems unlikely to ever do so. That inconsistency used to bother fans more than it does now. At some point, the audience accepted that Stewie operates on rules the show makes up as needed. He is a baby when the story requires him to be a baby, and a genius when the story requires him to be a genius. And the show does not feel obligated to explain how both of these things are true at the same time. The original Stewie was a premise. The current Stewie is a character. The difference between those two things is the difference between a joke that runs until it stops being funny and something that can keep changing and surprising people. Whether the trade was worth it depends entirely on which version you fell in love with first. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What Stewie's transformation points toward is a larger truth about the whole show, that Family Guy has never been as simple as it looks from the outside, and that the most interesting things it has done are often hiding inside moments the audience was not meant to examine too closely. The cutaway gag is the most obvious example of that. Most viewers treat it as filler, as the show buying time between plot points, as the animated equivalent of a non sequitur. But the cutaway gag is actually the most precisely constructed tool in the show's kit, and the argument it makes every time it fires is more deliberate than almost anyone watching it realizes. Section 7. The cutaway gag is not a joke. It's an argument. There's a moment in a season 4 episode of Family Guy where Peter is trying to explain something to his friends at the bar. He says that the situation reminds him of the time he got into a fight with a giant chicken. The show then cuts away from the bar entirely. What follows is a full 3-minute action sequence. No dialogue, no setup, no punchline, in which Peter and a giant chicken in a suit beat each other through buildings, across roads, off bridges, through windows, and across moving vehicles. The fight is choreographed like an action film. The music swells. Things explode. Eventually, Peter wins and walks away, and the show cuts back to the bar as if nothing happened. Nobody comments on what just occurred. The conversation continues. That sequence is the cutaway gag pushed to its most extreme form. It interrupts the story completely, runs far longer than a normal cutaway, contains no verbal joke, and ends without connecting back to anything the characters were talking about. Most people watching it for the first time laugh because the gap between what they expected and what they got is so large. A man saying something reminded him of a time something happened, followed by 3 minutes of cartoon violence involving a giant chicken, is funny in a very specific way. The humor comes entirely from the wrongness of the proportion. The setup is tiny. The payoff is enormous and completely beside the point. But the giant chicken fight is actually one of the few cutaways in Family Guy that works the way most people think all cutaways work, as pure random comedy with no connection to anything. Most of the show's cutaway gags are doing something more precise than that, and the precision is easy to miss because the gag moves so fast that there is no time to examine it before the show has already moved on. The basic structure of a Family Guy cutaway is this. A character in the main story says something. The show cuts away to a short scene that illustrates, contradicts, extends, or mocks what was just said. Then the show cuts back and continues. The whole thing usually takes between 15 and 45 seconds. By the time the cutaway is over, the main story has barely moved. The cutaway feels like an interruption. It feels like the show losing its train of thought and wandering off into something unrelated before finding its way back. That feeling is part of how the cutaway works as a tool. The apparent looseness of it disguises what is actually happening. When Family Guy cuts from a character's statement to a short scene, the show is making
making a claim. It is saying that these two things belong together. It is placing a character, a situation, a celebrity, a political figure, or a historical event next to whatever was just said in the main story, and it is letting the audience's brain do the work of building a connection between them. The show does not explain the connection. It does not defend it. It does not even acknowledge that it is making one. It just puts the two things next to each other and moves on, and the audience is left holding the association the show just planted. This is actually a very old comedic technique. Comedians have been doing it for as long as comedy has existed, saying one thing and then immediately cutting to something else and letting the audience figure out what the two things have to do with each other. The difference with Family Guy is the speed and volume at which it does this. A typical Family Guy episode contains somewhere between 5 and 15 cutaway gags. Over a full season, that is hundreds of associations the show is planting in the audience's head. Most of them are forgotten within seconds, but they land first. The association gets made before the audience moves on. The South Park episode Cartoon Wars, which aired in 2006 as a two-part story, made a direct argument against this exact technique.
Trey Parker and Matt Stone, who created South Park, used their show to argue that Family Guy's cutaway gags are not jokes at all. Their claim, delivered through the character of Cartman in those episodes, was that Family Guy's humor is produced by a random joke generator, that the show just throws unrelated things together and calls it comedy without any real thought behind the connections. The cutaways, in their view, were not a sophisticated tool, but a lazy substitute for actual writing. Their argument was that a real joke requires setup, escalation, and payoff. A cutaway gag, they said, skips all of that and just delivers the payoff without earning it. McFarland and the Family Guy team were aware of the Cartoon Wars episodes and chose not to publicly respond to them in any substantial way. The show did make jokes about South Park in later episodes, but there was never a direct engagement with the specific criticism Parker and Stone were making. That absence of a response is interesting because the criticism is not obviously wrong. There is a version of the cutaway gag argument that Family Guy cannot easily win. If you take any individual cutaway out of context and examine it on its own, it often looks exactly like what Parker and Stone described, a random thing placed next to another random thing. What that analysis misses is the cumulative effect. A single cutaway is a single claim. 100 cutaways across a season are a pattern of claims. Over time, the pattern builds a picture of how the show sees the world. Family Guy's cutaways cluster in specific directions. They mock the powerful and the famous with consistent nastiness. They undercut sentimentality the moment it appears. They take any expression of sincere feeling from the main characters and immediately follow it with something that makes sincerity look foolish. They associate celebrities with embarrassing or criminal behavior. They treat history as a series of absurd events rather than a serious record of human progress. The individual cutaways look random. The collection of them, taken together across the whole run of the show, reveals a consistent worldview. That worldview is not random at all. It is deeply skeptical of anyone in authority, deeply suspicious of people who take themselves seriously, deeply committed to the idea that the difference between a respected person and a laughingstock is mostly luck and timing. The cutaway gag is the tool that delivers that worldview at speed, over and over, without ever having to defend it or argue for it directly. The specific mechanics of how a cutaway works as a claim are worth going through carefully because they are easy to slide past. Consider a simple example. A character in the main story says something nice about a public figure. The show cuts to a short scene in which that public figure is doing something embarrassing, criminal, or stupid. The show cuts back. The main character continues. What just happened is that the show took a positive statement and immediately undermined it with contrary evidence, and did so in a way that the main character cannot respond to because the cutaway is not visible to them. Only the audience saw it. The audience now holds a piece of information that the character does not have, and that information directly contradicts what the character just said. The show has made an argument. This person is not what you think they are, without any character ever having to make that argument out loud. The Brett Ratner cutaway from 2012 works as a real example of this. In Season 10, an episode called Lego My Mego contains a cutaway in which Stewie, undercover as a young girl at an auction, is announced to various wealthy men in the audience. One of those men is named as Brett Ratner, who was at the time a well-known film director. The joke frames Ratner as someone who would bid on a child at an auction. In 2017, 5 years after that episode aired, multiple women came forward to publicly accuse Ratner of sexual harassment and assault. His career effectively ended. The cutaway from 2012 now looks like the show knew what was happening behind
behind closed doors. Whether the writers had specific knowledge or were going on the same industry rumors that surrounded Kevin Spacey, the cutaway had already placed Ratner in a context that proved accurate later. This is the same mechanism that produces the apparent predictions discussed in the previous section of this essay, but it is worth understanding that the cutaways about real people are not guesses. They are claims the writers are making based on what they know or strongly believe. The cutaway format lets them make those claims without being accountable for them. A cutaway is not a statement of fact. It is a joke. Nobody can sue a cartoon for a joke that turned out to be accurate. Nobody can force the show to take back a gag that proved correct. The format provides cover that a direct accusation would not. This is also why the cutaway gag is so different from a normal joke structure. A normal joke sets up a premise, builds tension, and then releases it with a punchline. The punchline has to make sense in relation to the setup or the joke fails. The cutaway has no such requirement. The two halves of a cutaway, the setup in the main story and the scene that follows, are not required to relate to each other logically. They are only required to create a reaction in the audience, and that reaction can come from surprise, from recognition, from discomfort, or from the brain doing the work of building a connection that the show deliberately left incomplete. Each episode of Family Guy takes approximately 10 months to produce from start to finish. McFarland confirmed this in various interviews over the years, and it has been reported by multiple people involved in the production process. The 10-month timeline is one of the main reasons the show rarely addresses breaking news directly. By the time an episode about something that happened today could be finished and aired, the event would be close to a year old. The cutaway gag format partly exists to work around this limitation. A cutaway can reference something recent without the entire episode being built around it, which means the show can stay connected to the cultural conversation even when its production schedule prevents it from commenting on specific events in real time. The 10-month production window also means that when a cutaway about a real person airs, the claim being made was written roughly 10 months before the audience saw it. In the case of the Brett Ratner cutaway, that means the writers were comfortable enough with their knowledge of the situation in 2011 to put it in an episode that aired in 2012. The audience saw it in 2012. The public confirmation of what the writers apparently knew came in 2017. The cutaway was the earliest public record of the claim, hidden inside a joke that most people laughed at and immediately forgot. Understanding the cutaway this way changes how you watch the show. Gags that seemed random start to look pointed. References that appeared throwaway start to look like something the writers needed to say but could only say sideways, inside a joke, fast enough that nobody could pin it down as a claim. The format gives the show the ability to be honest about things it cannot be honest about directly, and the speed of it means the audience is always a step behind. By the time you have processed what a cutaway just suggested, the show has already moved on to the next one. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The cutaway gag being a deliberate tool rather than a lazy substitute for writing does not mean every cutaway in the show's history was carefully constructed. Some of them really are just random. The giant chicken fight is a spectacle, not an argument, but the ones involving real people, real events, and real accusations almost never are. Those cutaways are the show saying something it cannot say out loud, in the only format available to it that is fast enough and disposable looking enough to get away with it. What the show says about its own characters is usually just as carefully constructed, and nowhere in the entire show is a character more carefully constructed or more deliberately misread by the audience that loves him than Brian Griffin. Section 8. Brian Griffin's death and the fan revolt that revealed what the show actually was. Brian Griffin is introduced in the pilot episode as the Griffin family dog. He is white, walks on two legs, drinks martinis, and speaks in complete sentences. He has written a novel that nobody published. He has opinions about politics and culture that he shares whether anyone asks or not. He considers himself more intelligent and more sophisticated than the people around him, which is partly true and partly a story he tells himself. He is the closest thing the show has to a voice of reason in the early seasons. The character who looks at what Peter is doing and correctly identifies it as foolish, who tries to apply some level of adult judgment to situations that have spun completely out of control. What Brian is not in the early seasons is the show's emotional center. That role develops slowly across the first few seasons, and it develops almost entirely through his relationship with Stewie. The Brian and Stewie dynamic begins in the season 2 episode Road to Rhode Island, the same episode that started softening Stewie's original evil genius persona. And from that point forward, the two of them become the most important relationship in the show. Their friendship produces the Road 2 episodes, a series of adventure stories where Brian and Stewie travel together,
argue with each other, and occasionally reveal something real beneath their usual performances. Those episodes became the most consistently well-reviewed episodes Family Guy produced across its entire run. The audience that grew up with the show formed a specific attachment to Brian that was different from the attachment they formed to other characters. Peter is funny. Stewie is clever. Brian feels like someone the audience is supposed to relate to. The one in the room who knows what is actually happening, who sees the absurdity clearly, who wishes things were better than they are. That sense of recognition is what the fan response to his death in November 2013 revealed with unusual force. The episode is called Life of Brian. It is the 6th episode of season 12, and it aired on November 24th, 2013. The story begins with Brian and Stewie playing street hockey outside. Stewie goes back inside the house to get his knee pads. While he is inside, a car comes around the corner too fast and hits Brian. Brian is taken to the veterinarian. The injuries are too severe. He dies on the table, surrounded by the Griffin family, with his last words being that he loves them all. The family holds a funeral. They bury Brian in the backyard. Shortly afterward, they go to a pet store and come home with a new dog named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico, who was best known at the time for playing Polly Walnuts on The Sopranos. It is important to understand the context in which this happened. Brian had been a main character on the show since the pilot in 1999. He had appeared in hundreds of episodes across 12 seasons. He was voiced by Seth McFarland himself, the same person who voiced Peter, Stewie, and Quagmire. The show had killed off characters before, but none of them had been part of the core family that the show was built around. Brian's death was not foreshadowed. There was no build-up. The episode began as a normal episode. The death happened in the middle of it, and the show moved on as if a chapter had been closed. The fan response began within hours of the episode airing, and was unlike almost anything the show had experienced in its history. A petition on change.org calling for Brian to be brought back was created the same night the episode aired. The petition gathered thousands of signatures within hours, making it one of the fastest-growing entertainment petitions the site had ever seen at that point. Some fans who had Brian Griffin tattoos posted photographs of themselves getting RIP added to the tattoos. Social media filled with reactions that ranged from genuine grief to anger directed at the writers, at Fox, and at McFarland personally. The episode received a 2.2 out of 5 rating from viewers on review sites, which was one of the lowest ratings a Family Guy episode had ever received. McFarland responded to the reaction in January 2014. He said that the team had been surprised by how angry the audience got. He said specifically that they were surprised in a good way, that people still cared enough about the character to be that angry. He said the team had expected the death to create some noise, but that the level of rage they encountered was not something they had counted on. He framed the audience's reaction as evidence that the show still had emotional weight, that the audience had formed real attachments to the characters, and that those attachments were strong enough to produce genuine anger when one of the characters was removed. What McFarland did not say in that January 2014 interview, though it became clear shortly after, was that the decision to kill Brian had never been intended to be permanent. 3 episodes after Life of Brian aired, the season 12 Christmas episode, called Christmas Guy, resolved the situation. In that episode, Stewie, who had destroyed his time machine earlier in the season precisely because it kept creating problems, finds himself in a shopping mall. He sees a past version of himself at a booth with Santa Claus. Stewie approaches his past self and steals the time travel device from him. He then uses it to go back to the moment just before Brian was hit by the car. He saves Brian. The two of them reunite in an emotional scene, and Brian is alive again. Vinny, the replacement dog voiced by Tony Sirico, appears in only 2 episodes after Brian's death before being written out when Brian returns. The show does not dwell on the logistics of what happened to Vinny after the timeline was changed. He simply stops appearing. The Griffin family has Brian back, and the show continues. The timing of the whole sequence, death in November, resurrection in December, the 2 events separated by exactly 3 episodes, tells you something important about what the writers were actually doing. The gap was long enough to generate real publicity and real fan reaction, but short enough that the show never had to fully commit to a version of itself without Brian. Executive producer Steve Callahan said in an interview before the Christmas episode aired that fans were smart enough and had been loyal long enough to trust the show. He was essentially confirming that the death was always going to be temporary, while simultaneously declining to say so directly. That combination, letting the audience genuinely grieve while the show privately knew the grief was temporary, is the most debated part of the whole event. Some viewers felt, and still feel, that the show manipulated them. They formed a real emotional response to a death the writers had no intention of making permanent. The petition, the tattoos, the anger, all of it was
directed at a decision that was being reversed while the fans were still reacting to it. Whether that feels like good storytelling or a cynical trick depends entirely on how you think about the relationship between a show and its audience. What is not debatable is what the whole episode revealed about Brian as a character. Brian Griffin, the talking dog who drinks martinis and fails to publish his novel, generated a more intense, immediate fan response than almost any character death in the show's history. The audience that had grown up watching him did not treat his death like a cartoon event. They treated it like the loss of someone they actually knew. Petitions, tattoos, genuine public expressions of grief for a fictional dog voiced by the man who also voices the show's main character. That level of response is not something the show could have manufactured. It was already there, built over 12 years of watching Brian exist in a specific way that meant something to the people watching. The character that produced that response is worth examining clearly. Brian is not a straightforwardly good person. The show has been consistent about this across its entire run. He is often pretentious in ways the show mocks directly. His politics are genuine, but his expression of them tends toward lecturing, which the show and the other characters find irritating. He has treated women badly in multiple episodes. He has lied to his friends. He has been a bad father to the son he has in the show. He is selfish in ways that are sometimes funny and sometimes genuinely unpleasant. The show does not hide any of this. Brian's flaws are as visible as his qualities. What makes Brian work as a character, and what made his death land as hard as it did, is that his flaws and his qualities exist in the same person at the same time. He is pretentious and also genuinely caring about the people around him. He is often wrong about himself and occasionally startlingly right about the world. He fails more than he succeeds, but the failures do not stop him from trying again. That combination, someone who is recognizably flawed in ways that do not cancel out his genuine good qualities, is harder to write than either a pure hero or a pure villain. And the fact that the show sustained it across 12 seasons before the death episode is what built the audience attachment that the death then exposed. The aftermath of Brian's return was also revealing. When Brian came back in Christmas Guy, the audience reaction was positive but mixed. Some fans were relieved and happy to have him back. Others felt that the return cheapened the death, that the show had used their emotional response and then undone it, that the whole thing had been a stunt rather than a real creative decision. McFarland and the team never fully engaged with that criticism. The show moved forward with Brian back in his usual place and treated the entire 3-episode period as something that had happened and been resolved. What the Brian death and resurrection created, beyond the immediate controversy, was a clearer picture of where the audience's actual investment lived. For all the famous jokes, for all the cutaway gags, for all the characters and running bits and cultural references the show had produced across 12 seasons, the thing that made people react most strongly was the idea that a specific relationship, Brian and the Griffin family, Brian and Stewie, Brian as the voice of reasonable observation in an unreasonable household, might be gone permanently. The comedy the show built its reputation on did not produce that reaction. The relationship did. That is the thing the Brian death storyline uncovered that no ratings number or fan poll could have revealed as cleanly. The audience had been paying attention to something the show itself sometimes seemed to underestimate. Underneath all the jokes about everything, underneath the cutaway gags and the celebrity mockery and the edgy humor, there was a set of relationships that people genuinely cared about. And one of those relationships, between the man whose voice Seth McFarland uses and the character whose voice Seth McFarland uses, is the same one the man who makes the show has said, publicly and repeatedly, he wishes had ended years ago. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That gap between what the audience loves about Family Guy and what its own creator thinks of it is the deepest and strangest thing about the show. And it starts with a statement McFarland made in 2011 that nobody who loves Family Guy has ever fully made peace with. Section 9. What Seth MacFarlane actually thinks of his own show. In 2011, Seth MacFarlane sat down for an interview with The Hollywood Reporter. The interview covered a lot of ground: his career, his plans, his other projects. At one point, the conversation turned to Family Guy and how long it had been running. MacFarlane gave an answer that landed with enough force that people in the entertainment world were still quoting it years later. He said, directly and without much hesitation, that he wished Family Guy was over. He said 7 seasons is about the right lifespan for a TV series. He said the show had run past the point where he felt it should have ended. Family Guy was in its 9th season when MacFarlane said that. It is now in its 24th.
4th. The statement did not come out of nowhere. McFarland had been the driving force behind the show from the moment he pitched it to Fox as a 25-year-old with a short film called The Life of Larry. He had created the characters, developed the format, written for the show in its early seasons, and voiced 4 of the main characters across the entire run. He was the show. His name was attached to it in a way that no other animated show in recent history matched, not just as creator, but as the primary voice in the room and the primary voice on screen. When people thought of Family Guy,
They thought of Seth MacFarlane, and vice versa, which makes the 2011 statement harder to process, not easier. This was not a disgruntled writer who had been pushed off his own show. This was the man whose voice you hear every time Peter speaks, every time Stewie speaks, every time Brian speaks, every time Quagmire speaks, saying publicly that the show should have ended 2 seasons before the point at which he was saying it. The context matters. McFarlane made the statement the same year he was deep into developing other projects. The Ted films were in production. Ted came out in 2012 and made over $500 million worldwide at the box office. He was developing The Orville, a science fiction show he would create, write for, and star in. He had released a Standards album, a collection of old-fashioned songs in the style of Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, which reached #1 on the Billboard 200 chart. McFarlane in 2011 was a person who had proven, at least to himself, that he could do things beyond Family Guy. The show had made him famous and financially comfortable enough to try other things, and having tried other things, he seemed to feel that the show was holding him to an identity he had already moved past. The practical reality of his relationship with the show had already changed significantly before he made that statement. McFarlane stopped writing for Family Guy in 2010. He confirmed this himself in a Reddit AMA in 2017, where he told users directly that he had not written for the show since 2010, more than 7 years before the point at which he was answering the question. He shifted into a production role and a voice acting role. He still came into the recording studio to voice Peter, Stewie, Brian, and Quagmire. He still received creator credit, but the actual writing, the work of sitting in a room and figuring out what the characters say and do, stopped being his job a long time ago. The show was handed over to a team of showrunners and writers who have run it since then. The showrunners have changed over the years. Alex Sulkin, who had been a writer on the show since the early seasons, served as showrunner for significant stretches of the later run. The writing team has turned over multiple times. The show that airs today is made by people who grew up watching Family Guy the way the audience did, who came to it as fans and then got hired to write it. McFarlane's fingerprints are still on the character voices and on the general shape of the show's sensibility, but the specific choices made in any given episode after 2010 were not made by him. This creates an unusual situation that almost no other show in television history has quite matched. Family Guy is a show that its own creator publicly declared should have ended, that he stopped writing for more than a decade ago, that he continues to voice 4 characters on out of what appears to be a combination of contractual obligation, financial arrangement, and genuine affection for at least some of what the show does. He is both completely connected to the show, his voice is literally in every episode, and almost entirely removed from the creative decisions that shape what those episodes contain. McFarlane has not repeatedly bashed the show in public after the 2011 statement. He has not given interviews saying the current seasons are bad or that the writing team is failing. He has been professionally measured about it in most public appearances, but the 2011 statement has never been taken back, and no later statement has contradicted it in any meaningful way. The closest he has come to revisiting it was a comment he made to a reporter around the time the show was renewed for additional seasons, in which he said something to the effect that as long as Fox wants it and the audience wants it, there is no reason not to keep going. That is a different statement from saying he believes in the show. It is a statement about supply and demand. The audience wants it, the network pays for it, it keeps going. The 4-season renewal announced in April 2025 will carry Family Guy through the 2028 to 29 television season. If the show completes that renewal, it will have been on the air for 30 years, from its 1999 premiere to its 30th anniversary. Each of those 4 additional seasons will consist of 15 episodes. Seth MacFarlane will voice Peter, Stewie, Brian, and Quagmire in all of them. He will do this for a show he said should have ended after season 7, which finished airing in 2009, meaning he will have spent roughly 20 years past his own declared endpoint, still giving voice to characters he created in his 20s. The question worth sitting with is what exactly he means when he says the show should have ended. McFarlane has never elaborated on the 7-season claim in great detail. The most generous reading of it is that he believes long-running shows tend to lose something essential as they continue, that the ideas that made a show necessary in the first place get used up, and what remains is a kind of mechanical repetition of the original show's moves without the original energy underneath them. The 7-season number is not random. Many of the shows that people consider the greatest in television history ran for roughly that length. The Sopranos ran for 6 seasons, The Wire ran for 5, Breaking Bad ran for 5. Even shows that ran longer, Seinfeld ran for 9 seasons, tend to have their most celebrated periods concentrated in a central stretch that ends before the show does. Family Guy's own history supports a version of this argument. The episodes that fans and critics most consistently identify as the best the show ever made, Band Geeks, Road to Rhode Island, The Road to the Multiverse, Stewie Kills Lois, Brian and Stewie, are concentrated in roughly the first 10 seasons. The later seasons have produced good individual episodes, but the consensus view among people who have followed the show closely is that it operates differently after a certain point. The jokes are still there, the characters are still recognizable, but something about the combination of all of it feels different from the early seasons, and the difference is hard to articulate precisely, but easy to feel while watching. McFarland's awareness of this pattern, combined with his decision to keep voicing the characters anyway, is one of the stranger situations in modern entertainment. He is not the first creator to outlast their own enthusiasm for a project. Television history is full of people who built something, ran it past the point of their own engagement with it, and kept going, because the infrastructure around the thing was too large and too profitable to simply stop. But most of those creators either stayed fully involved and kept trying, or stepped back entirely. McFarland found a third option: stay connected enough to maintain creative authority over the characters he voices, while stepping far enough back from the writing to no longer be responsible for whether any given season is good or bad. The result is that Family Guy, in its current form, is a show made by people who love it being voiced by a man who thinks it should have ended 15 years ago. That is a genuinely unusual creative arrangement. It means the show's biggest champion in the culture is not its creator. The biggest champions are the writers who came up as fans of the show and the audience that has watched it across 25 years. McFarland is the instrument through which the characters speak, but the decisions about what they say are made by other people. None of this has visibly damaged the show in the way that open creator-show conflict sometimes damages productions. The relationship between McFarland and Fox has remained stable. The actors who voice the other characters, Alex Borstein as Lois, Seth Green as Chris, Mila Kunis as Meg, have continued in their roles. The show kept getting renewed. The 2025 4-season deal was described as a mega deal, suggesting the financial terms were significant enough to make the arrangement worth continuing for everyone involved, regardless of anyone's personal feelings about the show's ideal lifespan. What McFarland's position reveals, when you look at it from a distance, is something true about what Family Guy became after it was revived in 2005. The show that came back from cancellation based on DVD sales was no longer just a creative project. It was a franchise. It was a brand. It generated merchandise, games, theme park attractions, spin-off shows, home video releases, and ongoing licensing deals. At that scale, a show's continuation does not depend on its creator's enthusiasm. It depends on whether the audience keeps watching and whether the network keeps paying. Both of those things have remained true for Family Guy across the entire period during which McFarland has been saying he thinks the show should be over. The person who missed that plane in Boston on September 11th, 2001 by 10 minutes and went on to build one of the longest-running animated shows in American history does not appear to think of that show as the central achievement of his life. He seems to think of it as something that happened and kept happening, that he is now permanently attached to, that he will likely be associated with long after everything else he has done is forgotten. The show about a cartoon family in Rhode Island will almost certainly be what Seth MacFarlane is remembered for. He knows this. He has said publicly that he expects it. And based on everything he has said about the show over the years, that knowledge seems to sit with him in a complicated way. The audience that loves Family Guy and the man who made it are not always looking at the same thing when they look at the show. The audience sees something that meant something to them, that they grew up with, that they have watched through enough of their own lives that it has become part of how they understand humor and family and the world. McFarland sees something he made when he was 25 that he thinks peaked around season 7, and that he has been providing voices for ever since. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Both of those things can be true at the same time, and the gap between them is the most honest thing about the show. Family Guy has always been a show about the distance between what what people say about themselves and what their behavior actually reveals. Its own creator demonstrates that dynamic more clearly than almost any character in it. Section 10. The 2 episodes Fox refused to broadcast, and what that says about the show's limits. Family Guy has been on American television for over 25 years. In that time, it has aired episodes involving the Holocaust, episodes mocking people with serious illnesses, episodes making jokes about suicide, domestic violence, rape, pedophilia, and terrorism. It has run cutaway gags about mass murder. It has depicted cartoon violence against women, children, and animals in ways that regularly drew formal complaints from watchdog groups. A group called the Parents Television Council placed Family Guy on its list of the worst shows on primetime television in 2000, 2005, and 2006. More than 40 individual Family Guy episodes were named by that organization as the worst show of the week during those years. Fox aired nearly all of it anyway. The show's reputation was built on that pattern. Fox allowing Family Guy to push further than most networks would allow became part of the show's identity. The audience came to expect it. The controversy itself was part of the appeal, a show that kept going places other shows refused to go.
Kept on the air by a network that was willing to absorb the criticism that came with it. That reputation was real, and it was earned across hundreds of episodes and more than 2 decades of broadcasting, which makes the 2 exceptions so revealing. Across the entire history of the show, Fox pulled exactly 2 episodes before they could air. Not because they were too violent, not because they were too sexual, not because of the dozens of topics the show had mocked, or the hundreds of jokes that had drawn formal complaints. They pulled 2 episodes. The first was about Jewish stereotypes. The second was about abortion. And the specific reasons they gave for pulling each one tell you exactly where the real lines were drawn. And those lines had almost nothing to do with morality. When You Wish Upon a Weinstein was produced during season 2 in 2000. It was originally scheduled to air in December of that year as a kind of holiday episode timed around the Jewish celebration of Hanukkah. The episode follows Peter Griffin after he is scammed by a man selling volcano insurance, a product that is obviously useless in Rhode Island, and loses money the family needed. Looking for someone to help him recover financially, Peter decides what he needs is a Jewish accountant, because he has absorbed the stereotype that Jewish people are naturally better with money than everyone else. A lawyer named Max Weinstein happens to have car trouble outside the Griffin house. Peter befriends him, gets his money back, and becomes so convinced of the connection between Jewish identity and financial success that he tries to have his son Chris converted to Judaism at a chapel in Las Vegas. The episode ends with Lois stopping the conversion, and Peter learning that success has nothing to do with religion. Before the episode could air, Fox executives reviewed it and decided it was too risky. Their concern was that the episode could be read as genuinely anti-Semitic rather than as a satire of anti-Semitism. The argument the show was making, that Peter's stereotyping of Jewish people is ignorant and wrong, and that the episode exists to show his ignorance, was not enough to comfort the network. The fact that Peter learns the right lesson at the end was not enough. The fact that the episode was written largely by Jewish writers, including Ricky Blitt, who wrote the script, was not enough. McFarland noted on the DVD commentary that he showed the episode's script to 2 rabbis, both of whom approved it because Peter learns the right lesson at the end. Fox still pulled it. The episode contained a song called I Need a Jew, sung by Peter, which was a parody of the classic song When You Wish Upon a Star. In the original version of the song, as it appeared on the DVD, one of Peter's lyrics referenced a common anti-Semitic claim that Jewish people were responsible for the death of Jesus Christ. When the episode was eventually allowed to air on television, that specific lyric was changed. The DVD version has Peter singing the original line. The television version that aired in 2003 on Adult Swim and in 2004 on Fox had the line replaced with a softer version. The change was made specifically for broadcast. The original line remained on the physical DVD that people could buy and own. The episode did eventually air. Adult Swim broadcast it on November 9th, 2003, as part of their Family Guy rerun block, during the same period when the show was building the audience that would convince Fox to bring it back. Fox aired a censored version on December 10th, 2004. The gap between when the episode was finished and when it finally appeared on Fox was 4 years. 4 years of a completed episode sitting in a vault because the network was nervous about how one of the most well-connected and advertiser-sensitive communities in the United States might react to a cartoon making jokes about money and religion. The song I Need a Jew generated its own legal trouble that arrived years after the episode aired. In October 2007, The Bourne Company, which owned the rights to the original song
song When You Wish Upon a Star, filed a lawsuit against Fox and the producers of Family Guy. They argued that the parody was not actually a parody, but a copy, and that it damaged the value of their original song by association with the offensive content of the Family Guy version. The case went through the courts, and on March 17, 2009, a federal judge ruled in favor of Family Guy. The judge found that the parody lyrics were different enough from the original that the amount of the song borrowed was only what was needed to make the reference recognizable, and that the parody had no effect on the market value of the original song. Family Guy won. The song stayed in the episode. The lawsuit ended. All of that happened over one episode. One episode that eventually made it to television, that aired in censored form, that generated a lawsuit that took 2 years to resolve. And even after all of that, the episode is now a regular part of the show's catalog. It streams on some platforms. It airs in syndication. The gap between how dangerous it seemed to Fox in 2000 and how unremarkable it seems now is almost funny. Partial Terms of Endearment traveled in the exact opposite direction. The Weinstein episode got more acceptable over time. The abortion episode became more entrenched in its ban. What made the ban on Partial Terms of Endearment different from the Weinstein situation was the absence of any path back to broadcast. The Weinstein episode was held back by one network out of fear of one community's reaction, and when time passed and the cultural moment shifted, they eventually aired it. The abortion episode was held back because Fox president Kevin Riley framed the decision as purely financial, as a calculation about advertiser relationships during a difficult economic period. Financial calculations do not expire the way cultural nervousness does. The reasons Fox gave for not airing When You Wish Upon a Weinstein were at least partly about not wanting to offend a specific group of people. The reason Fox gave for not airing Partial Terms of Endearment was that the economy was fragile and advertisers might pull their money. That reason does not go away when the economy improves. It just waits for the next time someone asks. McFarland argued publicly against the abortion ban in a way he never argued against the Weinstein delay. He told the New York Times that there was nothing about the topic of abortion that should make it different from any other serious topic the show had addressed. He pointed out that the show had done episodes about gay marriage and the oil spill and other politically charged subjects, and those had all aired. He said directly that he believed if the same story had been told on a drama, he named House as his example, it would have aired without any trouble at all. What he was saying was that the format of the show, a cartoon comedy, made the network more nervous about the topic than the content itself warranted. A drama can treat abortion seriously, and that is expected. A cartoon comedy treating it seriously, in Fox's estimation, was somehow more dangerous because the format itself made it feel more accessible, more available to more people, more likely to land in living rooms where people did not expect to encounter the topic. That logic reveals something important about what Fox actually feared. It was not that the episode was irresponsible or harmful. The Fox president himself said it was handled well. What Fox feared was the advertiser reaction to a show with Family Guy's reach and reputation putting a clear position on the most contentious political topic in American life. The show could mock everything else because mocking everything else did not make any specific group feel that their core beliefs were being directly challenged. Abortion was different because the show picked a side, and picking a side on that topic in 2010 was a business risk Fox was not willing to take, regardless of how well the episode handled it. Put the two episodes side by side, and the pattern becomes clear. Fox's actual red lines were not drawn around violence, or sex, or religious mockery, or racial humor, or any of the dozens of categories that drew public complaints across the show's run. They were drawn around content that could damage specific business relationships. When You Wish Upon a Weinstein risked alienating advertisers connected to a community that Fox had strong ties to. Partial Terms of Endearment risked alienating advertisers who did not want their products associated with a position on abortion. Everything else, the Holocaust jokes, the disability humor, the violence, the crude sexual content, had an advertiser base that either did not object or whose objections Fox decided to absorb. The two banned episodes hit different parts of that advertiser base, and that is why they got pulled when nothing else did. The show that built its whole identity on the idea that it would go further than anyone else, that it had no sacred topics, that it treated everything as fair game, was ultimately tightly governed by the same calculation that governs every commercial television network. You can mock anything except the things that cost too much money to mock. Family Guy understood that about everything except itself. What makes that pattern worth understanding is that it cuts against the show's own self-image in an interesting way.
The show that always positioned itself as fearless had two specific fears. Not moral fears, but financial ones. And identifying those two fears tells you more about what was actually allowed and disallowed on American commercial television in the early 2000s than almost anything else the show ever did. That is the real iceberg under the surface of the banned episodes. Not the content, the business logic. And the show that spent 25 years making fun of everyone else never quite turned that particular lens on itself. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.